I know for a fact that a few of you that are on the call have already presented and published. So I encourage you to jump in, share your ideas as well. So let me go ahead and pull up my presentation, and if people who have access to the chat could help me with the chat, that would be awesome because I can't see the chat. So as I was getting ready for my presentation today, and I started to think about my own career, my own academic career, and was intrigued to look back and see what I had actually done, like how much I had actually written or presented. And for those who don't know me, I am Dr. L.A. I'm Dr. L.A. Stretch, and I'm the department chair for the CMHC program. But I was looking at my academic career from 2004 to 2018 and was a little shocked at kind of what I've accomplished in that 14-year period. I'd never really sat down and counted all of my publications and presentations, and I'm just going to give you a quick run through. I've published 1 book, 6 book chapters, 7 journal articles. I have 4 presentations in the next 4 months. I've presented 72 peer-reviewed presentations with 35 colleagues, and I've had 54 paid presentations. And just this morning, I was contacted by the American Counseling Association to do a 3-hour learning institute before next year's conference on telebehavioral health. So it's just amazing when I think about like when I started my career, where I was and how I felt about presenting and publishing, and where I am now. It's now kind of just part of who I am. I've done it so much that I don't really even think about it. It's just part of my process, part of my daily routine. And I think that's an important piece to remember as we're talking about this, that to really be successful in getting accepted at conferences and maybe even working to a point where you might even be paid for your presentations, and for publishing, you really have to make it a habit. It has to become a part of who you are. And while my recent treatment has kind of thrown me off my normal schedule, usually I start every week and I block off Monday morning. And I don't even open my email usually until 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. And I really try to focus on working on a piece of scholarship or submitting a proposal or, editing something I'm working on. So I really try to start my week with scholarship and really protect that time as much as I can so that it's become a habit and a part of my daily routine. Today, we're going to be talking about, how do you write a conference presentation and a publication submission? What are the key elements of those items? And then where do you even find out when they're wanting conference proposals? So let's start with conference proposals. There's many, many, many different types of conference proposals. This is by no means an inclusive list, but this is a list that I looked at several conference brochures that I've presented at over the last 5 years, and I just looked for different names and time frames that those presentations were. So there's pre-conference workshops. These are usually invited. These are usually after you kind of made it in the field, people will invite you to come and present. They usually last anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes. Then you have learning institutes, which are much longer. They used to be 3 and 6 hours before the American Counseling Association, but this coming year, they've actually changed it to 3 and 5. In the educational sessions, those are where you go and somebody presents on a topic or a group of people present on a topic, and it's usually 30, 60, or 90 minutes. There's poster sessions, which we're going to look at a little bit in more detail because this is a really great way to get your first proposals accepted, is to do poster sessions. And those are usually brief, 30-minute. You stand up, you present your data, people wander in and out, and we'll talk about that format in a little bit in more detail. Then there's roundtables. Roundtables are where you literally usually have a round table. Dr. Rush Wilson and I have done a couple of these together. And you sit at a table and you might have a handout, but people come and go and they ask questions about your topic and you tell them what you're doing and you might have questions for discussion. And it's literally just an opportunity to really kind of have a brain trust where you bring people together to talk about a common topic and you're facilitating that conversation. And then you have panel discussions, and these can be anywhere from usually an hour to 2 hours, sometimes longer. But this is usually a panel that is contributing in some way to knowledge. ACA asked me this morning if I wanted to be on a panel discussion about private practice. And they also asked me about the Learning Institute and trying to practice good self-care. I said, I'll do one, but not both. And so, but the panel discussion, they wanted to have each panel member present for 30 minutes. It was actually going to be a 3-hour panel discussion on private practice, and each person was going to talk about a specific aspect of private practice. So that's something they're doing before the ACA conference in New Orleans next year. So those are just the different types of conference presentations that you can have. Now, some people are going to be surprised to see their faces in here because I did embed some pictures of different people that you guys know. This is Dr. Rush Wilson and I when we did a Learning Institute for ACA last year. We did a 6-hour Telebehavioral Health Institute, and it was so much fun to present with her. And so here are my tips for proposal development. First of all, you have to follow instructions. I know that for students, oftentimes they're so frustrated sometimes with faculty about why is she so nitpicky or why is he so nitpicky about, this APA detail or, that I didn't put it in the format that they asked for. We're really trying to get you ready for the profession because when you apply for conference proposals, when you submit something for publication, when you apply for a grant, you have to follow those details to a T. They are looking for reasons to get rid of you. For the 2019 ACA conference, only 34% of the proposals were accepted. Now, that's a really highly competitive conference, whereas you have other conferences like the Association for Creativity and Counseling, which is an awesome, amazing conference that Jennifer and Susie and a few others were at this year. That has a much higher acceptance rate. So, it's about talking with your faculty advisors and finding out, okay, which conferences am I most likely to get accepted at? The Humanistic Conference, the ACC Conference, the LGBT Conference. A lot of these conferences have a much higher acceptance rate than the national conferences. I've also had the pleasure of presenting internationally. I presented at the ACA European, and that one actually has a pretty high acceptance rate too. So that's a really fun one, and you get to travel internationally. Dr. Brown is actually at that conference right now, in fact. So follow the instructions. Submit what is requested, nothing more, nothing less. You give them exactly what they ask for. And I'm going to show you an example that Dr. Foster and I submitted earlier this year to show you what that looks like. You need to abide by the word count. Now, fortunately, most of these submissions are electronic, so you can't go over the word count. It won't let you submit, but let me tell you, you will spend so much time trying to get what you're trying to say into a very concise, succinct manner so that you can meet that word count. So it will help you in that way, but it won't let you submit if you're over the word count in most submission processes. Create a descriptive title. You don't want a title that's 60 words long, but you do want a title that really captures what this particular proposal is about. And you want to make sure that that title is aligned with the rest of the content in your proposal. So you don't want to have words in your title that they don't see anywhere else in your proposal. And you'll see from the grading or from the scoring rubric that that's a really important piece, that there's continuity and alignment that's going throughout your presentation. Make sure that when you write the abstract that's going into the program book, you want to make sure that that's citation free. It needs to be standalone because you're not going to have space for a reference list. So you want to make sure that what you write are your own words and they're describing what you're hoping to accomplish in that particular proposal. You want to connect to the conference theme and the audience. So if I'm trying to write a proposal for the Association for Creativity and Counseling, I'm going to probably mention creativity. I'm going to mention something that's experiential, creative, innovative, so that I can connect to the purpose of that division. If I'm putting in a proposal for the upcoming social justice conference in Ireland, I'm going to talk about social justice. If it's the ANCD summit that's coming up, I'm going to talk about working with marginalized communities, because that's what the topic of the summit is. So you always want to make sure that you're connecting to the theme and the audience to whom you're proposing you're going to present to. And the other thing is team up with faculty and peers. And I think our conference that we've had yesterday and today is such a great example of that. You want to work in teams. There's very little I do that's not part of a team. I mean, you can see here, Dr. Rush Wilson and I are co-presenting at ACA. And like I said, I've presented with 35 different colleagues across, and many of those I've presented with multiple times, but there were 35 different people that across those 72 peer-reviewed presentations that I've presented with over the years. And I find that, your ideas are better when you're in a team. They become so much more, become so richer in ideas and concepts. Know your literature around your topic. Make sure your literature is current too. That's really important. Like, for example, when I was reviewing ACA proposals this year, I saw 2 different proposals out of the 16 that I reviewed that had cited the wrong ACA code. They were still citing the code before, I think the 2005 code instead of the 2014 code. That's almost an automatic rejection, because if you don't know that we have a new ACA code, that's a problem. And we want to make sure that the information you're presenting when you present is accurate and current. And many of the submissions now are asking you for current references when you submit. I also recommend that you develop your proposal in Word so that you can grammar check it, so that you can check the spelling. It's also helpful because then you can email it to a couple of friends who can proof your proposal for you. That's essential. It's really funny. The day that proposals are due for some of the major conferences, most of the faculty are on the phone with each other and emailing each other and trying to get each other to proof things and check things. And hey, do you want to go on this one, or do you already have your 2? And so there's a lot of hustle and bustle about that. And then finally, print and save a copy of your submission. It was interesting. This wasn't this year. This was a few years back. I submitted a proposal and I never heard about it. I think this was for ACES, which is the Association for Counselor Educators and Supervisors, and I never heard about it. But I had a receipt. I had, that my submission had gone through, and I happened to know the person that was doing the proposals, and I said, hey, I've never heard back on this. And she goes, what was your proposal? We didn't have it. Somehow it didn't go through, but as soon as I was able to scan my copy to her and send it to her, they actually added me into the program. So that was really, good, because I had that receipt and I had proof that I had submitted it. It doesn't always work that way. Like, I know it wouldn't work that way in ACA, but for some of the smaller conferences, especially if you have a topic that's of, interest to a lot of people or really rounds out the proposals for that conference, then you might actually get pulled in later if you can show that you submitted, okay? And if at any point, Dr. Hudson, don't hesitate to interrupt me if there's questions.
Now there isn't any in the chat, but I will.
That's fine. Okay, great. So this is actually a picture of me presenting at ACES in Pittsburgh with one of my former doc students, who now is a close colleague. She's a department chair at another school now. And we present a lot together. Her name's Kristen Venenzi. And I wanted to tell you what the components of a proposal, like what type of information are you going to have to give? Well, you have to give your demographics, your name, your address, are you a member of the association to which you're applying? That's important. Including any licenses or certifications, your level of experience. And I don't want you to be intimidated that you don't have a master's yet or you don't have a license yet. You still have value. I'm thinking about Michaela, for example, who has a lot of experience, right? She could really contribute that to a conference, right? And so just bringing that knowledge, or I think about, Katie Decker-Fisk as a military spouse and what she could contribute to that process and the knowledge that she could bring to a group of people who wanted to understand that culture. So don't think that just because you're a graduate student that you don't have something to offer, because I know many of you have an amazing amount of knowledge and information to offer. You can always team up with a faculty member too. Faculty are always open to mentoring and co-presenting. I really can't think of a single faculty member on our team who is not co-presented with students. I honestly can't. Everybody has, and that's something that we're very passionate about. You have to tell them which session format and what level of session you want. So is it a basic, an intermediate, advanced? Now, sometimes you'll put in a session format, but that doesn't mean that's what you're going to get. Dr. Foster and I, for example, have put in for a 90-minute, but we got a round table. That's okay. We still have a forum. We still have a place to go. We can still put in our CV. We can still talk about something that we're passionate about. So it doesn't really matter as much the format. You can make it work if they change the format. The title of the session, what's the rationale? Why should this population, why should our profession care about this proposal? Like, what does this contribute to the profession? That's the rationale or significance. Learning objectives, it's really important that these be measurable. So you don't want to say participants will learn how to diagnose. That's not really measurable. Learn what? What about diagnosis? Whereas more measurable might be, participants will demonstrate utilizing the DSM-5 to create an ICD-10 diagnosis. Much more concrete, much more specific. The participants and the proposal reviewers will know what it is, the outcomes that, those participants are going to leave that session with. Educational content, like what's the content going to be about? So like when I talk about telebehavioral health, for example, I talk about the ethics and I talk about the law and I talk about how K-Club requires that we train students on technology and that I'm going to give people information on how to engage ethically and legally in telebehavioral health. My target audience, who am I targeting? Is it graduate students? Is it doctoral students? Is it counselor educators? Is it counselors in the field? Is it supervisors? Who is going to benefit from this? And then the presentation structure. I tend to like more of an interactive style, especially when I'm in person. But even when I'm not, I like to have a lot of engagement. And I couldn't figure out how to work that in totally to this one. So we're going to try to figure that out as we go. But I like to have some sort of small group exercise or interactive exercise, a case study, a role play, something that will engage the audience. Those tend to be the sessions that really get selected when you're going to have some sort of engagement or activity in that. Then handouts and materials, you don't have to have those ready usually, but you do need to be able to tell them what type of takeaways will the participants be able to get. Now, the thing that's a little challenging for me, and I know for others, is that like for some of the larger conferences, you have to have those handouts in 4 or 5 months ahead of the session. And you've got to submit them so they can go into the electronic portal. So you really have to be prepared that if you're accepted, usually you have like 2 months, 3 months to prepare your materials and get those in. And you just have to recognize that sometimes changes happen, especially like for me presenting on telehealth or social justice, but changes are constantly happening. So like last year when we did our telehealth, I had to update people and say, okay, I had to turn these handouts in January. We're now sitting here in, I think, April or May, even, it might have been May, and said, here's some changes that have happened since we submitted those, and, gave them that updated information because there's usually a gap between when those are due and when you actually get to present. Then what's your expertise? How do you know what you know? And how did you get that? And then addressing diversity and ethics. I think this is absolutely essential. And I honestly didn't think it was a very fair assessment, but I was doing, I think it was ACE's review not too long ago, and nowhere in the conference proposal, the call for proposals, did they mention ethics and diversity, but it was actually part of the scoring rubric. So one of the things that I would tell you is make sure that you don't just look at the instructions, look at the rubric that the reviewers are going to use, which is usually published, and see what they're going to score you on, because they don't always match. Because a lot of people that put in for ACEs didn't address diversity or ethics in their description, but they were being scored on it. And it was because it wasn't in the instructions. So just make sure you check both of those things, which are usually on the call for proposals, which is on the website at the association. And references and resources, making sure they're current. So within 10 years, 5 years is even better. A program guide description, that's what's going to be in the program guide, the conference program. And then if there's tracks, sometimes there's tracks like private practice, supervision, clinical, and you choose military. You choose which track yours is in. I wanted to pop out of my PowerPoint, and I wanted to show you an example of one that Dr. Foster and I put in last year. So This is an example. This was done in an electronic form. They have an electronic portal where you type in all your different information, and this is the printout that I printed out. So you can see that, it's for the 2019. This is the title of our conference. We were talking about the VCTC. Here's all my information. Here is, you can see my education, my degree, where I got my degree, who am I currently working for, what's my bio. They even wanted a picture. So we had to add pictures. So we had a picture. And there are other presenters. Yep, Dr. Foster. So all of Dr. Foster's information, her bio, her picture, all of that, where she got her information. We put in for a 90-minute session. Here we said we were looking for an advanced audience. We felt like these needed to be people that are already out in the field. And then we gave the rationale for our proposal, growing modalities, yes, I did K-Craft. Then here's my learning objectives. These are the things that hopefully the participants will be able to do when they leave. Educational content, we just skipped. That's a description of what we're going to talk about, like what information are we going to cover. Target audience, presentation structure, handout, keys, talked about diversity, resources, program guide. So this is what will show up in the program. Primary track, additional track, etc. So you can see, pretty comprehensive process. So it takes a little bit of time to put these together. Now, once you've done these, you will actually end up with, I don't know if everybody does it, but I actually keep all of my presentations in one folder in my Dropbox. And so I have those to refer back to. And I've actually have a start on an Excel spreadsheet where I have information on all the primary things I present on so that I can just pull from that Excel spreadsheet. And I don't have to recreate everything every single time I do a presentation. Next, we're going to talk about just some guidelines that most conferences have. You do need to be a member in good standing. Sometimes there's exceptions to that. Like there's some regional conferences, like I'm in the southern area region, but I recently went to the North Atlantic region to present. They actually invited me to present on telehealth. And I also put in to present on some assessment things that we do. And I'm not a member of the North Atlantic, but they basically wanted me to come up there. So I didn't have to be a member of the North Atlantic. So with the regionals, sometimes you can move around, but you might have to pay a little bit more for your conference fee because you're not a member of that region. Primary presenter is the contact person. So if I'm co-presenting with Dr. Hudson, for example, and I'm the primary presenter, then I'm responsible for communicating every communication I get with Dr. Hudson. There's often a limit, and this is where you can work with your peers and you can each put in maybe 2 presentations, and if 2 of the 6 that you all put in as a group, you can add each other to the presentations as presenters afterwards when you know who's been accepted. That's something, a little kind of trick that some of us use when we're submitting presentations. We then add each other on as additional presenters. Presenters must be available to present when the conference is there, so make sure you check your times. Like there was recently, and I'll show you guys actually what this looks like, there was a call out. This is the ACA member minute. Most of you should be getting, all of you should be getting this because it's an email that comes to all ACA members. And at the bottom of this, there is this call for Let the Voices Be Heard, ACA to take part in International Social Justice Conference. And I was like, oh, that's exciting. That's an area I'm very passionate about. I'd love to go to Ireland. And then I scroll down, and when I went to find out when in October this conference was, it is in direct competition with the ACES conference, which I'm required to go to. So I can't go to this conference. So I needed to check that before I submitted to make sure that I was available to present, because there's no way I can be in Seattle, Washington and Belfast, Ireland at the same time. I just can't do that. So that is something that you have to definitely check. And you also have to register for the conference by the deadline. That's important. And Some conferences will remind you. Some of the larger conferences will not. They will take you right out of the schedule if you're not registered by the time you're supposed to be. So it's really important to make sure you get registered. Some conferences offer a benefit of reduced registration for certain types of conference presentations, like if you get accepted for a full-day learning institute, sometimes you'll get a registration for free. It just depends on the conference, and some conferences do and some conferences don't. Overall, the review process, it is a blind review for most, but not all. ACA is no longer a blind review process. So they see who the presenter is. There's no hiding. You know who's being presented, who is the presenter, and the reviewer is able to see who the presenter is, their background, and everything. Whereas some other reviews are blind and they cover who the presenter is, so that it's based on content and not who the person is. It's usually a committee of counselors, but you can, as long as you're an ACA member, like for ACA, you can put in it's like a call for volunteers to review proposals, and you can put in to be a reviewer for the conference proposals. It's on the same page as the call for proposals. And that's a really great way to get familiar with the process and to really understand why different things are so important. Because once you start reviewing, you realize very quickly, wow, that makes no sense. I don't understand this in isolation. I don't know what this person was trying to say. And it will help you become a better proposal writer. So I really recommend doing that. So here's an example of a rubric. So these are the criteria that the 2018 proposals were reviewed on for ACA. So you can see diversity and ethics are in there. Is it innovative, cutting edge? And not all of these things were listed in the instructions. So it's really important that before you write your proposal, you go and you look at these review rubrics, or even ask for the review rubric if you can't find it, and see what the criteria are that you're going to be evaluated on. It really helps you write a stronger proposal. And then I wanted to talk about poster sessions in particular, because poster sessions are a really great format for getting started with conference proposals. And according to CSI, these just convey research findings or novel approaches. So for example, our current leadership team for CSI, our Chi Sigma chapter, Jennifer, James, and Lala, they put in a poster proposal for next year's ACA talking about how do you do an online, I think that's what you guys did, Jennifer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but how you can do an online chapter and really inspire community in that. And so with the poster session, it's literally like a bulletin board. That's literally what you get. And you have these items on your poster board to tell about. Jennifer, are you still on? Can you tell us?
I am. I'm on mute because my dog's barking, but I'm here, yeah.
Can you share with the group kind of what you guys are proposing? We don't know if you've been accepted yet, but what you proposed?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So our proposal is about building counselor identity in an online world, and we thought that we were in a unique position to present on that, being that we are master's students pursuing our degrees online.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So, see, they've got this novel approach, right, to graduate education, and they want to share that knowledge about how this can be done and what they've gained from it from a student's perspective. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate you jumping in. So, you're creating these, and then I borrowed one of Dr. Soli's ones to show you what one looked like. She did this one, I think this was at ACES in 2015, but I might be wrong. But this was one that she did. You can see she's very creative and colorful. You can see how it kind of pops and gets people's attention. Most conferences are going to give you this bulletin board, 8 foot by 4, and they're going to give you a supply of thumbtacks, a push pen. There will be no audiovisual, no electrical. You'll have a few minutes before your poster session to set up and a few minutes to take down. And you're doing it right after somebody and usually right before somebody else, because there's usually a whole bunch of poster sessions that go up. When the poster sessions are going on, you'll be in a room that probably has 20 to 30 other poster sessions. So people are kind of like wandering around and mingling, and they might stop and talk to you for 5 minutes, or they might stop and talk to you the whole time, you know. So you just never know. You kind of have to be on your kind of toes to be able to answer questions about your stuff, and maybe have a handout that you can give people that has your contact information, or a business card that you can give them so they can ask you more information and follow up with you later. It's really important that whatever you do in your poster, it needs to be able to be read from 8 to 10 feet away, because sometimes there might be a large group, and, you know, people might be a little bit further away and they want to be able to see your poster. So you don't want 12-point font on your poster. You want to make sure it's big and bold, kind of like Dr. Foley's here, right? So just some reminders as we finish up the proposal section, and that is attendees have a lot of choices. So you want to make sure that your program guide and your proposal is well written, because people have a lot of choices, and you want people to come to your session. People like things that are practical. They like things that they can learn about and then go out and use. They also like to hear about current research and new things that they could think about trying, and they definitely like interactive sessions. All of my interactive sessions get really high scores on the evaluations, because people like doing things. They don't like to be just talked at, right? So I'm going to stop here, and with the call for proposals, these are some places that you can find proposal calls. Like I showed you that one from Ireland. Could be a conference homepage. ACA Connect has them all the time. The ACA listservs, the membership, your state associations. I get things from my specialty associations like ACC, the Association for Play Therapy, and then always your CMHC online advising forum, because we post things there on a regular basis about upcoming conferences and emerging leader opportunities. So any questions about conference proposals before we start the publication?
Regarding session levels, is there a preference for advanced over basic?
Most of the time they will tell you, like in the call for proposals, like this last year, ACA specifically said we really need more advanced proposals. You know, so they will usually say, if not, it really doesn't matter. You know, I usually do, when I start a presentation, I usually try to get a sense of the audience when I first start my presentation, and then I just have to scale my presentation to where they are in their knowledge. Good question, though. Others? Dr. Hudson or any of the other faculty, would you add anything about proposals?
Sometimes there are themes to what they want. I don't think you mentioned that. Sometimes there'll be like a theme to the overall conference, and it's important to make sure your proposal lines up with that theme if there is one.
Right, exactly. And use the wording that they use. Great point, Dr. TR. W. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, we'll have time at the end for more. So we're going to go into publication submissions now. So I looked at specifically JCD, which is the Journal for Counseling Development, which is our flagship journal for our counseling, to say, okay, these are the types of articles you usually see in a journal: practice ones, theory, and research. So, you know, these are kind of the three buckets for that particular journal. Other journals have other types of studies. You know, there's even some journals that have book review sections. So you have to really be familiar with the journal. So I encourage you to go to the journal homepage, just explore. You know, if there's a journal you keep finding yourself drawn to read and to use in your classes, find out more about the journal. Go to the homepage of that journal and learn more about that journal, because journals are written by editorial boards, and they have missions and visions and things that they want to accomplish with their journal. So I think a lot of times when you're at the graduate level, you just stay at the article level. And it's not like, this will tell you how old I am, when I was in graduate school, we actually had to pull journals off the shelves and go through them and find articles that way. We didn't have electronic databases when I was doing my graduate work or my undergraduate work. And so that when you were doing it and you were pulling the journal off the shelf, I think we got more familiar with the journal as a whole versus now when we're doing these electronic databases and we're looking for just articles instead of really getting familiar with the journal. This is an article that Dr. Ruth Moore and I actually published, The Tug of War Child. We were the lead article for 2 play therapy magazines back to back. And that was something that she and I worked on with another colleague, Ann Ordway. And so play therapy, that's a magazine. That's not necessarily a journal. It's kind of like Counseling Today for play therapists. And so we submitted for that. And the things that are really important, very much like your conference proposals, is follow instructions. The editors have and the reviewers have no tolerance for people who don't follow instructions, and they'll just reject your article. Most journals, most magazines that are in our field get so many submissions that they can be choosy. They can be picky. Submissions are now pretty much electronic. I don't know of a single professional publication that uses a mail submission anymore. You want to make sure that you choose a journal, a newsletter, or a magazine that is looking at the same thing that you're looking at. You know, like I said, they have missions and values. You want to make sure you align with those missions and who their audience is. This Tug of War Child was a series that Dr. Moore, Dr. Ordway, and I wrote where we were talking about the dual relationship that play therapists often are put in when they are providing play therapy and then get subpoenaed to court. And how do you deal with that dual relationship when you're being pulled in as a forensics or a child custody reviewer versus being the play therapist for the child? And so we did a 2 magazine series on helping counselors know how to navigate that and also how to prevent that from happening. You have to use APA format. It is the language of our profession. So we're not hounding you on APA just to hound you on APA. We actually want you to be able to communicate with other professionals. This is the language that crosses all of mental health, not just counselors, social workers, psychologists, everybody. So we need to be able to use that language and be able to write in that language so that people will be able to understand how to find citations, and we'll be using appropriate language, which we'll talk about in a second. You need to be very concise. The word limits are very tight. I remember the first article I wrote, I think I started with like 50 pages and I had to get it down to like 25 or 28. And, that's half your paper. Like you're having to cut half of the things off, but it's amazing how concisely and succinctly you can write when you have a word limit. And so that really helped me become a better writer, actually, because I've had to learn how to write in that way. They really don't want you to use tables and figures unless you absolutely have to, because it costs them more money to print them. So those things should be used sparingly. The preferred language of our profession is counselor, counseling, and client. So you don't want to say patient. You don't want to say therapist. We actually have preferred language that our profession has said this is the appropriate language we should use when we're writing about counseling. We also want to make sure we're using non-discriminatory language. Like we don't want to say transgendered. We want to say transgender. We want to say, what are these terms and what terms should we be using? And we need to be current with our language so that we can speak about people appropriately and use person first language, where we would say, that this person, this is a person who has dealt with substance abuse, or this is a person who has been diagnosed with something, but we don't want to say a borderline client or a schizophrenic client. We want to make sure we're using person first language. The other thing I'll say is that when you're reporting out on research, and this is like a bit of a soapbox for me, is you want to make sure that you don't just report the N of the sample. So you don't want to just report how many participants are there. You want to report out who those participants are by age, race, ethnicity, gender, disability if known, military status, whatever is appropriate and applicable to that study. You need to report out who that sample represents because that's really important in knowing to whom you can generalize the results. Manuscripts. exploration. And this is a book here, DSM-5 and Family Systems, that Dr. E and I wrote a chapter on dissociation together, and that was an amazing experience with her. The APA, we want to use APA manual. And then here's the components. You'll have a title page, which is max, because journals are blind reviews, so you'll only have your title. You won't have who you are or what institution you're associated with. An abstract, keywords, article, the actual article, your tables and figures, and there's a really specific way that you have to do that. And that's all outlined in APA about how to do it on a separate page. You can't just create a table and say, okay, I'm done. You have to look at APA. It tells you how to create a table, where it can be a double line, where it can be a single line, what type of line does it need to be. It's amazing how specific they are. And then your references, and make sure that every citation has a reference and every reference has a citation, because that's one thing that editors will send it back for and say, we're not interested, you're missing stuff. If you do have an extremely long direct quote and there's really no reason for you to have a quote at all, or if you have any previously published tables or figures, you have to have written permission to use those. I say avoid those and create your own work. Abide by the page limitations, and you will have to sign a copyright and a licensure agreement, because you are actually giving your work to that journal. They now own it. And so that's a little tricky. And always have your colleagues review it. Same thing with your proposals. Always have somebody proof it and review it multiple times if you can, because you will overlook that typo every single time, because you know what you meant to write. So it's important. And then this is the book that I published with 3 colleagues, 2 from England and 1 from here in the States, Technology and Mental Health. That was quite the experience. That was an international book. And you want to talk about different writing styles, trying to pull together people from so many different countries, and to try to come up with some consistent flow was a huge challenge. That book took us about 3 years. It was quite the process. So when you submit, here are the things that editors might say to you. They can say, yay, congratulations, accepted. I have never had anything accepted without edits. I've heard of these mysterious unicorn articles that get accepted without any revisions, but I personally haven't experienced that. It's usually under consideration with revisions required, and they'll send you the reviewer's feedback. Like, I'm on the editorial board for the Canadian Journal for Counseling, and we actually enter our information, like we review the article, and then we give feedback on format and content in an electronic portal, and that electronic portal puts it all together for the editor. The editor sends it to the author then responds to every single one of our points, and either corrects or says, I don't want to do this because, and then we'll decide whether or not it should be published or not. So it goes back through another review process with the same reviewers, or it could be rejected for not being aligned with the journal, not being well written, or just having inaccurate or outdated information is another reason something might be rejected. Here's the thing for call for submission. The journal homepage, like I said, start to explore your journal homepages. You might find that it's kind of interesting what the editorial board is, because there is something called journal bias too, where editorial boards only really publish the things that align with their mission. So if somebody submits something, and I can give you a great example of this. So a colleague and I, Dr. Jason King, we did some research a few years back, and we looked at non-KCREP programs and KCREP programs. And we looked at their outcomes on the national counselor exam, because this was when there was really starting to be this huge push with state licensure boards that they were insisting they needed KCREP programs. And interestingly enough, Dr. King and I both at the time were chairs of state licensure boards. So we were getting really good insight into this debate and what was happening across the country. And so we did this research project where we looked at several, like I said, non-KCREP accredited programs and several KCREP accredited programs, and looked at their outcomes on the national counselor exam and looked to see, is there a significant difference on these outcomes? And what we found was that the non-KCREP programs at the time in certain areas were actually outperforming the KCREP programs. And this was a huge finding. It was like, oh my goodness, this is big, right? we didn't know why there was that difference. We didn't know if it was specific to those schools. We couldn't do a much larger one to find out how broad that was. But we found this finding, and we tried to publish this in 3 different journal articles in the counseling field, and it was rejected every single time. And I was later told a couple of years later by one of the people who had been on the editorial board that it didn't align with their support with KCREP. And I thought that was interesting that they were choosing not to publish a really well-written article with really amazing, significant findings, in my opinion, for our field, because it didn't align with the journal support for the KCREP movement. So just because something isn't published doesn't mean it's not good. It also doesn't mean that what is published is the only opinion and the only research out there. And that's a really important thing to remember. You need to be a critical consumer of journals and not take it too personally when you get rejected, because there may be some opinion-based reasons that you got rejected, not just because you're not good enough or your paper's not good enough and things like that. I mean, you definitely would want to make any improvements they suggest, but sometimes there's politics involved, and that's important to realize and really understand. So here's the places that you can find call for submissions, and I wanted to show you what author guidelines look like. So these are the author guidelines for the JCD. You can see very detailed. They tell you like how many pages each thing needs to be, where it needs to be, tells you, you know, limitations on pages. I mean, it's very, very detailed, very detailed. And then this one right here is the TCP or TPC, which is the professional counselor. This is the NBCC journal. And this one is an open access electronic journal. This is a really good one to get published in. They actually have a high acceptance rate. JCD has a very low acceptance rate, and it usually takes 2 years from submission. It's 18 months to 2 years to get accepted and published with JCD. With TPC, I've had an article published within 3 months. They're so fast. So they're much more, and because they publish more too, and because they're an open access electronic journal, they have more space. It's not like the printed one like JCD. So here's the one for TPC. And I can share these and post these as handouts for this as well, just to give you examples of what this looks like in case you're interested. And again, I just want to stress that I started writing as a graduate student and getting published as a graduate student. You know, one of the best places I think as a graduate student to get published is like our department newsletter, the regional newsletters. I think all of these are really good places, and you have value and you have something you can share. Like maybe you volunteered at a conference and you can write about that experience. That's something that's awesome, and that helps other people and encourages other people to get involved. So that is my presentation. I have some references here. I did not do a full APA reference, though. I wanted to give you guys a direct link, so you'll be able to click on these and go to each one of these resources. So what questions, comments, thoughts? What are y'all thinking? Don't leave me out here hanging. You guys gotta ask me some questions or give me some comments.
So what if we have an area of interest, but it does not actually align well with the research areas of interest of the instructors and professors?
Well, I think that one of us would probably still be willing to mentor you on the process. So even if the content isn't something that's in our realm, we can mentor you on the process. And that's something that we're all very willing to do, is help you with the process and even help you decide, okay, like if you want to write this, where would this best fit? Like what journal might I know about that you may not even heard about yet, you know, that might be a good fit for that. Does that help?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Others?
Is there a strong preference for original research?
Sorry, allergies. Thank you. Sorry, allergies. I would say that yes, original research is wonderful, but if you're not at that level yet, don't worry about it. It's more about practice, theory, and innovation. Any of those things will help the profession. So it's just how does it help the profession? I'm going to call on a couple of you that I know have been to presentations and stuff. So Susie, can you talk about the proposal process and presenting? Because I know you did so at ACUC.
Sure, be happy to. The proposal part, because I kind of had never done that before, so that was a little bit of a challenge. Like you said, the word count, especially trying to fit everything that I wanted to say into that. Dr. Moore really helped me with that, so I was grateful for her assistance. I had no idea that I would. I mean, she and a few other professors kind of said, "Well, just go for it. You have nothing to lose." I had I really was quite surprised to be invited to speak. So it was a pleasant surprise. It was really great. And I really enjoyed the process. I was nervous, of course, but I thought it was a great way to learn and a really accepting place to do so. So I would highly recommend that everyone give it a shot, just from my perspective.
Yeah. And Ashley asked a really good question about what do you do when your proposal is not accepted? I have just as many not accepted as accepted. Okay, so you're not alone, Ashley. But what you can do is, if it's not one of the mega conferences like ACA, you can usually reach out to the conference coordinator of the proposal and say, hey, is there any feedback you could give me? Is there any feedback I could get on my proposal to make it better? Or bring it to one of us and let us try to help you make it better. That's something that is, we work as a team. The faculty meet every term. We have what's called a portfolio scholarship meeting where we meet and we help each other with writing. We work in teams on writing. So, like I said, Dr. E and I wrote that book chapter together. I know Dr. Foster and Dr. Stoll, everybody on our team is working on other projects with each other, and we're successful because we're doing it as a team. Does that help, Ashley? You can say yes in the chat if not, or no. Okay, thank you.
Her microphone's not working.
Yeah, I saw that. I would love to see students reach out. Yeah, and good. Thank you, Michaela. I appreciate that. Great example. Yes, we have our own newsletter, and it has stalled out a little bit, and we'd really like to get it going again. Stella and I have talked about some different formats for it to make it much more innovative. But Michaela just put in the chat, that we'd love for other people to be in the newsletter committee. This is a great opportunity to start writing. It's a great opportunity to start getting published, and be able to say, I wrote this article for my graduate program. That counts. It's something that matters, and you're going to get reviewed and you're going to get feedback. So it's really important to take advantage of those internal opportunities, and as well as like this virtual conference next year. We hope to see even more students presenting. I have been absolutely blown away by the quality of the presentations during this virtual conference. I just cannot say enough about everybody who's presented, and the questions that y'all have asked during the conference has been wonderful, the engagement. And this is a great opportunity to start to practice these skills and start to practice, contributing, which is an ethical responsibility to our profession. We have an ethical responsibility to contribute through writing and through presenting and sharing our knowledge. That's really important to remember. Other questions or comments? So I will call on Ashley or Jennifer, because I know you both have presented too. What feedback do you guys have for them, for everybody else?
So I loved presenting at ACC. I was so nervous at first. I didn't know what to expect. I couldn't have asked for a better experience. It was a great way to network with people. I will say that knowing deadlines is super important because Ashley and I were really pumped to submit a proposal for ACA, and we realized, oh, you needed to do that in early June.
Exactly. Months and months. I mean, you think
Yeah.
about it, that's literally right after the ACA had just ended. So, and it's always due the first week of June. ACA proposals are always due then. Yep. And Ashley, I know her mic's not working, but she just posted, and I want to remind everybody, this is the last day for student discount registration for ACA conference in New Orleans in 2019. That's a good call out, Ashley. Thank you so much. Because we want to make sure that we are getting as many students down there as possible. It's going to be a great experience. Dr. Hudson, would you add any words of wisdom?
I don't know. You covered everything. I thought you did a really good job kind of covering everything I thought about you actually said. I want to just kind of reiterate what I think it was Jennifer about the deadlines, because I think that gets me sometimes too. Things are due at all kinds of different deadlines for all kinds of different things, and sometimes they're right on top of each other. So even looking ahead or even making a chart can be helpful so that you know when things are due, and if you miss it this year, you'll be ready for it next year. I like to just encourage students to send in proposals to CSI Day at ACA. If you want to present at ACA, it's a really good way to get started. They have a high acceptance rate as well, and if you're a member of CSI, then you have the opportunity to do that.
Great suggestions. And I love the idea of a chart. That was something that Dr. Brown was mentioning he needed to do, because he ended up with like several conferences right on top of each other. And he was like, I forgot that April and March are connected, and just seeing that things were coming really close together. Dr. Rush Wilson, what about you? Any other words of wisdom?
I had to get off of mute. One thing that I would recommend you do is if there's a conference that you regularly present at or that you're interested in, please check their website and find out when the submission date is, and don't expect that they'll email you a record, because, for instance, this year I missed the conference, the European Conference of ACA, because normally they send out an email, but somehow I didn't get it.
Yeah, a bunch of us didn't get it this year.
And Dr. Stretch, if I could say one more thing, because this is just my experience as a first-generation college student. I always thought, oh, I'm doing really well in my program and classes, and my professors are going to come to me and ask me about helping them on their presentations or their writing. And I just want to encourage our students to go to us, because that was something I had to learn the hard way, that a lot of times faculty would love to do something with you, but they're not thinking that to contact you about a project. So coming to faculty is a really good way to kind of get into that process.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, I can't think of a single person on our team who doesn't want to work with students and mentors. One of, I think, the strengths of our faculty is they love mentoring. They love working with students and working, and presenting together and writing together. So don't think, well, Dr. LA is a department chair. She wouldn't be interested in writing with me. Well, if you're going to write with me, you might have to take the lead on, reminding me that we need to write. Because on my schedule, but it's not that I don't want to write, I do, and I'd love to have somebody help me with some of these projects that I've got. I've got tons of unfinished projects. Dr. Rush Wilson and I were talking about that, all the unfinished projects that we have that, we would love to collaborate with somebody on. So don't hesitate to reach out. And I know we're at time, Dr. Hudson, so I will stop there, and if anybody has any other questions, they can reach out to me or to any of your faculty.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks for
so
being
much.
here.
Thank you.
All right, this is such a great segue into our next presentation, because we have two students presenting together. Susie and Giovanni will be presenting on the topic of, sorry guys, I got to pull it up here. Developing the counselor's voice through authentic expression. So if you all would like to hang out for a little bit and hear Susie and Giovanni present, that would be wonderful.
And did you need to stop and start?